Good morning. This is Coach Ellis for Transformational Conversations, and you're listening to Faith Friday. I want to share a story with you. Back in the Roman times and along the Roman road, between these two small sister cities, there is a road that connected them. In the middle of the road one day, there suddenly appeared a huge rock. The rock was so big that those who were on chariots and those who were on wagons and those who were pulling wagons had to literally go around the rock and sometimes off the road to get past the rock. So as a man was traveling with his son, they came upon this rock one day, and the son saw the rock and said, "Papa, why is that rock in the middle of the road? It's huge. We must go around it. We must get off the road to get around it. It's huge. Why is it there?" And his father said, "Son, this is the king's road. And the king either placed the rock there or he allowed it to be there. But Papa, there's a sign near the rock that says you must push the rock." And the father said, "Really?" And the young boy began to push on the rock. And he pushed on the rock for about 5-6 minutes. The rock did not move. And his father said, "Son, we must go to the market, get our supplies for the week, and go back home. Let's go around the rock." And so the father took his son around the rock, and they went to the city, picked up their supplies, and went back home. Every time they came this way, which is at least every other day, maybe every 2 or 3 days, the young boy stopped and for 10-15 minutes pushed against the rock. And while he was doing that, in between times, other people come and they spend 5 minutes pushing against the rock and then leave. They try to get the horses to pull the rock. It wouldn't work and they would leave. So ultimately, this young man would spend 10-15 minutes. His father was very gracious, giving him time to push against the rock and then encourage him, "Son, let's go to the market and get our supplies." This happened for several years, and the young man of 8 years old grew into a young man of 13. Every day for the last several years, they had stopped by the rock and he spent 15-20 minutes pushing against the rock. Now at the age of 13, he says to his father, "Father, I'm a young man now. And the sign says push against the rock. So if you don't mind, Papa, I want to stay here and push against this rock while you go to town and gather our supplies. And when you get back, I will take the cart the rest of the way." So his father left him, a young man of 13, and he pushed against the rock. 1 hour passed and Papa hadn't returned. 2 hours passed and the young man was still pushing against the rock. 3 hours passed and the rock still was not moving. And on the 4th hour, his father returned from the city, picked him up, and at this time the young man was tired and exhausted, but he was still leaning and pushing against the rock. And every day from that day forward, his father would drop him at the rock while he went to town, and the young man would push for the hours until his father returned. This happened for another couple of years, and by the time the young man turned 16, his notoriety had gathered in the nearby cities, and people would come out every day to see this young man push against the rock. And of course, people in crowds have things to say. "Oh, you're a fool for pushing against the rock. It'll never move." And some people will say, "You can do it. I believe in you." Others would say, "I just want to see how long this clown going to push." But every day he struggled and he pushed and he pushed and he pushed. Finally, one day, his father was dropping him off at the point, And the young man said, Papa, on this day I will push until the rock moves. And his father said, I will go to town and I'll pick you up on the way back. And this young man said, if the rock hasn't moved, Papa, I will stay and I will push through the night. 3 hours passed and Papa returned. The young man was pushing and leaning into the rock. The rock had not moved. Papa said, let's go home. He said, Papa, I will stay and I will push until the rock moves. So the man returns home to his family and leaves his son. The next day, as the man goes down the same path he's traveled for the last 7 or 8 years, a crowd is gathered around the stone, around the rock where the young man is pushing. And the crowds have gathered and there's lots of noise, and the young man, as the father makes his way through the crowd, the young man is grunting and he's pushing and he's sweating and he's snorting. The rock had not moved an inch, but the young man was invigorated. He was pushing, and his father began to notice some things. Here he sees for the first time that his son had grown from a scrawny little 8-year-old until a 16-year-old young man with a fabulous physical physique. He noticed that as the young man sweated, his muscles were ripping as he was pushing against the rock. The father stayed and didn't go to market that day, and he watched his son struggle. And at one juncture, he walked up and said, I will help you, son. And he began to push against the rock. And one by one, members of the crowd began to join the young man as they pushed against the rock. And nightfall came and the rock had not moved. Finally, the young man, totally out of energy, totally out of strength, arms so weak that he could not even give himself water. Out of the crowd came a stranger who offered the young man water and lifted his canteen to his mouth and allowed him to drink. Then he asked, he said, young man, I'm a stranger in these parts. I've watched you for several hours push against the rock. Why? Did you just go around like everybody else? And a young man in a very hoarse whisper said, my papa told me that the rock is here because the king has either placed it here or has allowed it to be here. The sign in front of the rock is from the king that said, push against the rock. I have to believe that if the king knew the rock was here and he said to push against the rock, that there had to be some benefit, because I trust my king. At that time, the stranger pulled off his ratty clothes, and before the crowd of people stood the very king who had placed that sign. He told the crowd, he said, this young man had such trust and faith in the word of his king that when it did not make any sense, when the rock would not move, he continued to press forward and do as I had asked. This man of physical strength, of moral courage, of this young man of inner strength, has demonstrated that he understands sovereignty. I have no heirs. I have no sons. When my time is over, young man, the kingdom will be yours. The father looked at the king and said, sire, why do you gift my son as such? And the king responded, because the command was to push against the rock, not to move the rock. The reason I tell this story is that many times we have issues in our lives. We have challenges in our lives. There is turmoil going on in our lives. And God simply says, push against the rock. Our job is to push, and the results belong to God. Our job is to push because he said push. Sometimes we're not meant to move the rocks out of our lives. We're meant to push against it so others can see how we fight. Sometimes we're not meant to be released from the ill of cancer. We're meant to fight through it so people can see how we still keep our faith. Sometimes divorce will happen and our lives will be shattered. And people say, because you believe in God, it shouldn't be this way. But sometimes God allows that so others can see how he will be glorified from it. Whether it's death, divorce, disaster, whatever your rock is, I encourage you on this Friday, push against the rock and let the King worry about the results. I'm Coach Ellis, and this is Transformational Conversations Faith Fridays. You can reach me at coach@elliscrum.net, or you can reach me at Coach Ellis on Facebook. And remember, push against the rock, do your part, and the King is responsible for the results. We'll talk to you next week. Have a great and fantabulous Friday.